What is the soul, and is the soul immortal? I very strongly believe that this is a question for neuroscience. That is, but nobody ever has a calculus seizure. Nobody ever has a mathematics seizure where you can't stop doing long division. I trained in neurosurgery at the University of Miami and have been at Stony Brook on faculty there since 1991, and I've done about 7,000 brain operations. And I've learned a fair amount, not only academically, but just in personal experience, as to how the brain works and how the mind relates to the brain. I saw a number of things over my career that made me question the traditional materialist way of understanding how the brain works. The patients I'm going to show you here are real people. I've changed their names. Picture on, I guess it would be which side? On your left is an MRI of the brain of a young lady, and the black there is spinal fluid. The brain is the gray stuff there. She's missing about 2/3 of her brain. That's the way she was born. The image alongside of it is a normal brain for comparison. When she was a young baby, we scanned her and found this, and we were rather pessimistic with her family about her chances of having a normal life. She grew up a completely normal person. She was on the honor roll in high school. If you met her today, you'd say, oh, she's a bright young lady. She's perfectly fine. Missing 2/3 of her brain. This is a little boy named Joshua. He was born missing also about 2/3 of his brain. And he, is that, again, that black space there is just water. He was evaluated by the ethics committee at my hospital, and they recommended that he not be fed when he was born because he was in such terrible shape that it'd be better if he passed away. We rescinded that order and fed him, and he's now graduating from high school, perfectly normal young man, plays sports, he's a great kid. Maggie is a young lady who was in a gifted program when she was young. She's a brilliant young woman, missing most of her cerebellum and part of the central regions of her brain. She has had to have some surgery to take care of fluid pressure there, but she's done very well. She has a master's degree in English literature, and she's a published musician. Is the brain completely the organ of the mind? Clearly, in some ways it is, but in other ways it may not be. This question was first addressed by Wilder Penfield, who's a neurosurgeon, worked in Montreal in the mid-20th century. And he asked a fascinating question. He said, why are there no intellectual seizures? When people have seizures, if they remain conscious during the seizures, they do one of four things. They'll have uncontrollable movements. Their arm will shake. They can have sensations like tingling on their skin. They can have emotions, powerful fear or laughter or joy, and they can have memories. You can have a seizure where you get this recurrent memory. But nobody ever has a calculus seizure. Nobody ever has a mathematics seizure where you can't stop doing long division. And Penfield said, that's really odd. If you can evoke all these other things, why can't you evoke abstract thought, reasoning, theology, philosophy, thinking about God? It doesn't happen from seizures. And he said the most reasonable explanation is that that aspect of the mind isn't from the brain. He tested this further by intraoperatively with awake patients, stimulating the surface of their brain to map the brain, just like you would map a city, and to find out where different things were located on the brain, again, so we could protect them in removing epileptic foci. But he couldn't find any kind of abstract thought centers in the brain. There's a movement center, there's a sensation center, there's a visual center, there's a hearing center, there are emotional centers, there are memory centers, but there's no center for thinking abstractly. There's no center for reason. And he said, that's odd. That's the same thing that he found with looking at the kinds of seizures that happen. Wilder Penfield also studied free will, and he did a very interesting study. During these awake brain operations, he would stimulate the surface of a patient's brain, and if you stimulate the right place, you can make them do things, like make them raise their arm. He would ask them during the surgery to occasionally raise their arm themselves without him stimulating them. And you can't feel your brain. Your brain has no sensory things, and the patients are under surgical drapes, so they can't see what he's doing. And he would ask them, when your arm goes up, I want you to tell me whether you did it or whether I did it. And they always got it right. Hundreds of thousands of trials of this in 1,100 patients. No one ever missed it. No one ever got it wrong. And he concluded then that he couldn't find any place in the brain that simulated free will, that free will wasn't in the brain, that you could always tell, this is my will. This is not someone doing it to me. So free will is not a brain function. Benjamin Libet did probably the most famous research on free will. And what Libet found, and it would take a while to go in details about how he did his experiments, they were quite ingenious, but he would record electrical signals from the scalp, and these are people who haven't had any surgery, they're just normal volunteers. And what he found was that when you decide to do something simple, there tends to be a spike in brain activity that happens about a half second before you decide. Like if you're going to turn on a light switch, about a half second before you turn on the light switch, your brain spikes. And that's before you're aware that you're going to turn it on. So that seems at first glance that everything is driven by your brain. Your brain makes you do it, and you don't really have any free will. It's all just chemicals driving you to do things. But he was a very clever researcher, and what he did is he asked people to veto your decision. That is, that when you're about to flip the switch, say, no, I'm not going to do it. I've changed my mind. And the veto didn't have a spike in the brain. So he said, it's not so much that he showed there was free will, but they showed there was free won't. That is that your brain, and he commented, he was a religious man, and he said, this is the traditional religious way of understanding human motivation, that we're hit with temptations from our brain, but we have the free choice to do it or not. Because the free choice to do it or not did not have any new brain activity at all. It was independent of the brain. So the brain keeps hitting you with these things, have that extra piece of cake. But you can say yes or no, and you can't blame your brain. Adrian Owen is a researcher, I think he's currently in Indiana, he was at Cambridge in England, did a fascinating study in patients in persistent vegetative state. Persistent vegetative state is the deepest level of coma. It's just a step above brain death. And it happens when people have had very severe brain injuries from lack of oxygen or from motor vehicle accidents. And it's called vegetative because it's been assumed that these people are basically vegetables, meaning that they have no mind. They're just a body and there's no mind left. Some of you may recall the Terry Schiavo stuff that went on about 20 years ago. She was in persistent vegetative state. What Owen did is he put patients in MRI machines and did functional MRI imaging that shows brain activity. And he would ask them to think about things with a headset. He'd say, think about walking across the room, or think about your family, or think about playing tennis. And they would show patterns of brain activation in their very damaged brain. And he then did that with normal volunteers and found the patterns were identical, implying that they were understanding what he was talking about. And then what he did, and he was very clever, he asked the same questions, but he mixed up the words so they didn't make any sense. Instead of think about walking across the room, he'd say room across walking about think. Doesn't make any sense. And the brain was silent. So these people were understanding the questions he was asking, even though their brains were practically destroyed. And he actually found, he and other people have replicated his work, that about 40% of people in persistent vegetative state show clear evidence of being able to communicate. There are people who can do mathematics in persistent vegetative state. You ask them, what's 9 plus 6? You count, when you hit 15, the brain lights up. There are people who can tell their family histories. You know, is your brother's name George? The brain will light up. So you can communicate with people in the deepest level of coma in many cases. Near-death experiences are sort of the paradigmatic example of a separation between the soul or the mind and the brain. And while some near-death experiences may be not genuine, they may be hallucinations or whatever, there's no doubt that there is a real core of real experiences. They're probably about 20% of near-death experiences are veridical, meaning they can be checked. The person knows things that occurred when they were dead, things that went on inside the room, etc. The probably most famous near-death experience was Pam Reynolds, who was an aneurysm patient, operated on in 1991. And in order to safely operate on the aneurysm, her surgeon had to stop her heart after cooling her body down to about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that gave him about 30 minutes to fix the aneurysm. He drained all the blood out of her brain, fixed the aneurysm, and then rewarmed her and started her heart again. And she survived and did very well, actually. She said that in the recovery room, she said, I watched the operation. He said, what? You were brain dead. You couldn't possibly watch the operation. So she said that as soon as her brain went dead, she popped out of her body, floated up to the ceiling, watched the surgery. She said that her vision was amazingly accurate, and it was a beautiful scene. And then she told him what he talked about during the surgery. She told him what the instruments looked like and what music was playing in the room during the surgery. And things like this have happened a number of times. So in my view, there's no question that some near-death experiences are very real.